So I read just recently an excellent article from Peggy McIntosh, who at the time of writing was the Associate Director of the Wellesley College Centre for Research on Women. It's not a recent article. It was written in 1988. However, I found her words striking, and I will share the paper with everybody in due course. She starts her paper by reflecting how, as a woman, she has noticed that some men have an apparent unwillingness to grant that they are overprivileged, even though they may grant that women are disadvantaged. In a week where we have already had a lecture and a discussion on issues facing women in higher education, in support of our aspirations for silver institutional accreditation for Athena Swan, I thought that was rather topical. Now, what, you are probably thinking, has that got to do with today's discussion? And I can feel many people in the audience having a heart palpitation thinking, Sally's forgotten which bit she's talking to. No, I haven't forgotten which session I'm speaking at, and it will all become clear, I promise you. So Peggy McIntosh goes on to say that in thinking through unacknowledged male privilege as a phenomenon, she realised that since hierarchies in society are so often interlocking, there was most likely a phenomenon of white privilege that was similarly denied and protected. And as a white person, she realised that she had been taught about racism as something that puts others at a disadvantage. But she'd also been taught not to see one of its corollary aspects, that white privilege puts her at an advantage. Now, I stand before you in exactly that position myself today. I have struggled and puzzled over the concept of white privilege. I have read books and papers, I have attended conferences. However, I have never really connected with the concept that that description is me until fairly recently. And I'm embarrassed on that position of mine. And I'm now prepared to say that. The atrocities that the world witnessed with the death of George Floyd in May has galvanized the global protest, rightly so. And it affects us here at Hallam in so many ways, as we try to bring about our culture of one of inclusion and one that is fundamental to our aspirations in all that we do. We have a long, long way to go. We have to have honest, open and transparent conversations, not being afraid to get it wrong on occasion, not being afraid to say, I don't know what to do, not being afraid to say, I don't understand, not being afraid to say, may I ask about whatever it is that we want to understand, but are afraid of appearing ignorant, or worse, causing offence. Not being afraid to call out and challenge behaviour that we consider or believe to be unacceptable or inappropriate. And fundamentally, this is about dignity and respect for each other. If we have a thought or a question, we should be able to ask it, explore it, feel it, live it. Children have a wonderful directness of saying stuff because they simply want to know the answer. And as we get older and theoretically more sophisticated, we lose that ability, that simplicity of directness, of just asking a question. We get clogged up and we get bogged down. We are terrified of getting it wrong, of being accused of being a racist. Now we have to create the environment to have those honest conversations. There is a lot of great work happening here at Hallam. Some of it is hidden currently, and we have to make it more overt and lived. And part of that great work is to have speakers in who can help us with our thoughts, our concerns, our hopes, and our fears. So without further ado, may I introduce Kul Malhay, our visiting speaker and facilitator. Kul, may I extend a very warm welcome to you.
Well, thank you, Sally. And, you know, so much covered in such a short period of time there. I think, you know, some of the points that you were making were so poignant that they hit home, I'm guessing, with so many people here. Thank you so much for inviting me yet again. This is second day I've been with Sheffield Hallam and talking to some incredible people. We had a wonderful session yesterday with the top 50 leaders to Hallam yesterday, and I have to say the findings from that and the participation and the authenticity that came through yesterday's session was something that I've not seen in many organisations. I worked with a number of organizations and continue to do so across many, many sectors on the issues around diversity, race, and around leadership. Because for me, all of these are combined issues. My central tenet to my leadership development is emotional intelligence. And I think an organization that can create a healthy culture is an organization that is emotionally intelligent. And when you have a healthy culture, then things like diversity are not necessarily something that you have to think about, because they form a golden thread throughout the entire organization. You create an environment where every single person within your organizations feels valued, feels a part of something special, works towards a common goal, and also feels that they have the equality of opportunity to progress within that organization or to have their voice heard within that organization. My history is that I spent 32 years in the police service. And yesterday I shared for the very first time, to be quite honest, my own experiences when it came to race. When it came to overt racism, covert racism, unconscious bias, whatever you want to call it, because the terminology is so convoluted nowadays. For me, it's about the impact that it has on an individual or a group of individuals. And today I'll share another aspect of that story. So for those of you that weren't there yesterday, let me just tell you that, policing for me was my passion from the age of 10. It is literally the only thing that I ever thought about. When you have a passion that's so strong within you and you go to bed at night and you're still thinking about that, well, that's what policing was for me. I wanted nothing more than to be a police officer. I watched every single police program. I used to go to our police station, our local police station, ask for every single pamphlet, every single booklet. I went on patrol with our local police. I used to go to the bottom of our street every Saturday, every other Saturday, to watch the crowds of football fans going to the football stadium, which was just 2 streets away. But I was looking at the police officers and everything that they stood for: safety, security, responsibility, authority. That's what it meant for me. The British Police Service I still regard it as being one of the very best in the world. And yet it has a long way to go. When I finally joined the police service after having been rejected 26 times by 26 different forces, and eventually I got through on the 27th occasion, such was my passion, I ended up in a little place called Derbyshire, which many of you will know is only just south of where you are right now. A beautiful county, full of greenery, full of such diversity that I'd never experienced before. You see, I came from the concrete jungle of Wolverhampton, where I was born and bred, and suddenly I was surrounded by the green fields of Derbyshire. But I also noticed one other thing. I joined just before the miners' strike. I noticed that I was also a very noticeable brown speck in a sea of white. Now, I had never really experienced racism in my life. I came from a very diverse city. So the first time somebody looked at me strangely or asked me where I was from, and then seemed perplexed when I said I was from Wolverhampton, then asked me again where I was really from, I was a bit confused. And then the penny dropped. They were looking not at me, but at the color of my skin. And as time evolved and time moved on, I also saw that their actions, for many people, followed their thought process. I have been held back from promotion. I have been told to walk for 2 years on patrol when I should have been in a police car because I passed my exams. I have been not given the best jobs and given the crappy little jobs to one side that don't really test my mettle. Despite the fact that I was the biggest thief catcher, the highest performer in my station, because I felt that was the only way I was going to get noticeable and noticed in the most positive of ways. I have been called every name that you can imagine, not just from the people outside, and you sort of expect that as a police officer, but to get it from your own colleagues. I remember an occasion when I was in training school, and we slept in dormitories. It was a very, very highly disciplined organization back then, in the early 80s. And about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, about 10 white guys, my classmates, came into the room and attacked me with punches. They dragged me. They actually daubed black polish all over me. And they said, well, it's not going to show up on you. Now, I chose on that occasion to ride the storm because I thought that I can't possibly kick back against this. And this was also a key lesson for me in life, that when you are faced with challenges, there are three types of people that show up. There are those that go home because they can't handle it. For me, they don't have enough passion that creates the necessary amount of resilience to push them forward. You have those that fight back. And with any fight, two parties are equally susceptible to being scarred, and nobody really truly wins. And then there are those whose passion is so great and they are so resolute that they commit to staying within the organization or within that grouping or within that community and get themselves to a position where they can change the culture. And that was my passion, that was my commitment, and that was my mission from there on in. I've seen a lot, as you can imagine, as a police officer. You see enough as a police officer that can affect you throughout your entire life, and some things still do. But what you don't expect is to have to face an inner conflict within the walls of the police station. That, for me, probably left more scars than the things that I saw outside. And this is not just true of police officers. The reason why I'm telling you this story is I want to amplify and demonstrate the impact that any kind of ism can leave on the minority individual. For me, it was race. But these are the lasting scars that I will have to carry with me throughout my entire life as I gradually work on my psyche, as I gradually work on my self-esteem, on my self-confidence, to get to the person that I desire to be. A person that has a positive impact on society, a person that can stand up and be recognized for their merits and their skills and their impact rather than the color of their skin. That's the depth of it all. And that can happen in any single organization. So when we saw George Floyd, for me, it was a horrendous incident, but just another incident in a series and a chain of incidents that go back decades. When I worked in the police service and I decided that I was going to get myself into a position of leadership so I could change the culture of the police service, I also did a voluntary role. And that voluntary role was to reach out to other Black and minority ethnic colleagues to see if their experiences were shared experiences, were similar experiences to mine. And I found that to be the case. They felt exactly like I did. And as a consequence of being able to talk to someone, for finally being able to talk to someone who shared exactly your views, your impact, your emotions, your fears and your dreads, it was like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. And as a consequence of that, we founded the Black Police Association. The Black Police Association then grew into other forces, and we helped set up Black Police Associations around the country, including South Yorkshire. As a consequence of that, we then ended up setting up the National Black Police Association, and I was honoured to be the first vice president of the National Black Police Association. And there was little old me, a lad who'd come from Wolverhampton, a simple lad who worked in Derbyshire, a small county in the middle of England, sitting in the Home Office, talking to Home Secretaries, senior politicians, and reshaping and restructuring the way the police service was going to change its dynamics and change its workforce and change its mindset as a result of the Macpherson Report. I was honoured enough to sit on the board of the Macpherson Report. The one thing I've learned in life is to become bitter leaves you unable to actually move an agenda forward, because what you're actually doing, you're having a very limbic response. You know, within your brain, there is the emotional center within your brain, which is your limbic brain. And when you make emotional decisions, you very often later on live to regret those. So for me, any decisions that I make to move any kind of an agenda forward has to be a very conscious decision, has to be a thought through decision. I need to make that decision with the prefrontal cortex in my brain, where it's rationalized. So for the last 6 years since I left the police service, I've worked hard and tirelessly, and I will continue to do so with a number of organizations around this issue around diversity, inclusion, and leadership, because I think leadership is absolutely central to everything that we're going to talk about today. I'm honored to be asked to host this session today and to be surrounded by people who are so passionate from what I picked up yesterday. And the fact that, you know, Hallam has said that it wants to have those uncomfortable conversations. Very often when we have these conversations, we skirt around the elephant in the room. We want to address that elephant. We want to bring that elephant to life. So I would encourage you today to ask those questions, those burning questions that you've had deep within you for maybe several years, and have the opportunity to do that in a safe environment. And so that we can all learn together. Because as I used to say when I was a leader within the police service, I do not hold a monopoly on good ideas. And I don't think anybody has all of the ideas when it comes to race and diversity. Otherwise, we would be beacons for the rest of the world. But here's an opportunity for Hallam to learn. And we can do that collectively. And if we ask those questions and learn you know, as a grouping, then maybe we can have a significant impact on Hallam. And maybe Hallam could then become the beacon of light for within the higher education sector. And that's what I would want for Hallam. I want other universities around the country to be looking at Hallam and saying, wow, look at them. They did some really good work, but it was the most simplistic of work. They addressed the issue. So without further ado, I want to welcome our panel. I don't know if Kevin has joined us just now. Kevin's here, is he? Great, excellent. So Sally's just introduced herself, and I'm just going to reiterate some of the things that Sally said, because you know, I think it's very important to understand how senior these people are and how passionate these people are on this agenda of race and inclusion. So Sally, as you know, is a Chief People Officer for Hallam. She sits on the university leadership team and is the lead for Hallam on EDI. She's also the champion for gender. But having seen Sally and having spoken to Sally to one side, I know how passionate she is about this central issue around race, which we're going to talk about today. Umar Zaman is the Director for Human Resources and Organizational Development. He's accountable for the delivery of EDI across Hallam. I've known Umar for a number of years now. Our relationship goes back at least 2 decades as far as I know. But I know that he has a very long history of working on the race equality agenda, spanning several sectors: fire, police, NHS, and higher education. So I know Umar has a lot to bring to the table today, and his passion will become self-evident. And finally, we have Kevin Kerrigan, Pro Vice Chancellor for Business and Finance, but Kevin also sits on the university leadership team and is the champion for race equality. I heard Kevin speak yesterday about some of the learnings that he had as a result of being in this role, and I would want him to just share those with you. So I'm just going to ask the individual members of the panel just a couple of questions each, just for them to, so you get to know where they're coming from. So Kevin, I want to start with you. I want to ask you, perhaps could you perhaps share with us what have been your key learnings in your position as champion for race equality?
Thanks, Cole. First of all, can I just apologise in advance? We've got some builders next door, and my son seems to have started a Zoom drumming lesson, so I may get drowned out at some point. Key learnings. I suppose the first thing, that this university has got a hell of a long way to go in terms of getting its position to one where it can be proud that it's got an equal, a diverse and inclusive culture within it. So I think that when I joined about 3 years ago, we were beginning to start to recognise the problem, and I think that that we've become increasingly aware of the fact that that our key metrics indicate a very significant problem. The main one, of course, is the degree awarding gap, where our white students are awarded first and 2-1 degrees at a much higher proportion than Black, Asian and other minority ethnic groups of students. And that's reflected, albeit at lower levels, in the graduate outcomes, the ability to get graduate level jobs or to move on to further study. There are other areas as well, but for me, those are the key ones, because obviously students are our lifeblood. They're our reason for being here in many ways, and to see our students thrive and go on to excellent jobs is is what most of us start off in university wanting to do. And of course, when you've got a diverse group of students coming into the university, you want to see success for all of them. So that's the problem. I also have learned that there's a huge amount of desire to change that, from the top through to the bottom of the organization. A desire to create the policies, the strategies, the interventions that will work. But that also many people, and I will put myself into this category as well, do not always know what the right thing is to do. And so I've also learned there's a need to talk to people, to listen, to look at the research, to explore the great work that has been done by other institutions and by other organizations, and learn what works and adopt those strategies systematically to effect change. And I'm sorry to say it's taking too long. And I feel that pretty acutely as a person that sits on the university leadership team, and something that I'm desperate to try and change. And I think COVID, George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement have, for me, just provided an opportunity to reset the dial a bit, to take that palpable sense of a desire for change and turn it into some practical, tangible, programmatic projects that will deliver success. So sorry, there's a bit of a long-winded reply there, Cole, but that's some of the things that I've learned.
No, some incredible learning there, and I heard you talking about some of those things yesterday, and it's so refreshing to hear of someone who says, you know, again, I don't hold a monopoly on good ideas. I'm in this environment now, and I am still learning, even at the position that I hold within the organization. I think that's incredible and commendable. Hopefully we're going to get into some more deeper questions, and please, can I ask everyone, do start thinking about questions, you know, those burning questions, and it really doesn't matter how simple those questions might be. And if you use the chat facility to put the questions in, the questions are being sent to me, so I'll be able to pick out from those questions and be able to address those questions direct. So Sally, I just want to bring you in now. I just want to ask you, what have you decided to prioritize? Why have you decided to prioritize the EDI agenda and specifically race right now?
Thanks, Cole. Yeah. So prioritizing EDI, partly because of the geographical position of Sheffield. South Yorkshire is a fascinating area where we have an extraordinarily diverse population. And a real richness. And Sheffield Hallam University is the university of choice for students in South Yorkshire. And so I felt that in looking through, and I don't live in Yorkshire, I live about 150 miles south. So coming to Sheffield, I was really hit very clearly with the extraordinary diversity that we have here in the city. Also the extraordinary socio-economic difference that we have. So on one side of the city, we have really extreme wealth and the most beautiful part of the country, and on the other side of the city we have equally extreme poverty and privation. And you know, as a university, we have huge importance, we have huge power, we have huge privilege in society. And so it was really the importance of making sure that we can bring as many people as we possibly can to experience that power and privilege of education. So that's one of the reasons why EDI for me. Partly too, because EDI in all its contexts. So I'm a woman. I'm of a sufficient age where I have fought and kicked and battled in some similar ways to the ways that you've described, Cole. I've never been physically attacked, it's true, but I have been verbally attacked on a number of occasions. And so as a woman, I have a fierce feeling of protective instinct to support my fellow womankind. I'm also registered disabled. My disability is hidden. So I also understand the difficulty that many people have when they perhaps aren't feeling particularly well. They don't want to show it. They don't want special support necessarily. So I understand an awful lot of some of our protected characteristics. I don't understand it all. I don't. And I think the reason why I wanted to particularly hone in on the race issue, if you like, is because that is probably where I am at my most vulnerable. I don't understand it all. I can't possibly understand it all. I will never be able to understand it all. But if I can learn more and I can empathize more, then that's got to put me in a better place. And I hope that will put the rest of the university and all of us in that position as well. So I recognise too that having had some extraordinarily poor role models in my life, and one day I will talk about some of those extraordinarily poor role models, I will bend over backwards to be somebody who doesn't get it right all the time, but I will try to be a really good and inspirational role model.
That's really powerful, and I resonate so much with all of what you said, particularly that last element. You know, I have had some of the most incredibly poor role models in my life who were so well accepted within the police service because they were seen or perceived to be strong people, when the truth of it was they were weaker than most of us because they could only resort to one style, and that was a very coercive kind of leadership style. You know, I was once told by a chief constable, Colt, you don't grip people. I don't see you gripping people much. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to get people up against the wall? Because that's a style that you're used to. So if I'm not gripping people, let me ask you a couple of questions. Every single department that you've ever put me in, you've only put me in those failing departments. Has the performance gone up or down? He says, up. I said, you know, have the grievances gone up or down in every single department that you've ever put me in charge of? He says, always gone down. I said, have you had good feedback or bad feedback about my leadership style? He says, good feedback. I said, so what is your worry? Seriously. And this is a question that needs to be asked of any leader of an organization that feels that they can only succeed when they have leaders who emulate their style and only have a singular style going into the organization. And that I think is one of the strongest arguments for diversity. If ever there was an argument for diversity, it is that truly diverse people, leaders within the organization, can capture so much more and deliver so much more. So thank you, Sally. And I can feel your passion in you to drive this agenda forward, and I'm grateful for that. Umar, I just want to move on to yourself now. I know that you've got a long history of working on the race equality agenda, and you've gone across so many organizations. And, you know, we first met each other when we both had dark hair and less of the grays, you know, and probably less weight. But I remember, I remember we had a very interesting discussion around race, you know, some 20 years ago. But you're equally passionate now. So let me ask you, why do you feel that you need or want to be a part of this debate?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much, Cole, and welcome everybody. Great to see so many people here. I think rather than me give an example of kind of a corporate answer to this, I want to give a bit of a personal answer, I think, because I think that's where it comes from. I've never really talked about my experiences of race until recently when I wrote a blog. First time in my entire life, very similar to yourself, that I've done that. Primarily, the reason for driving that is because I, again, like yourself, I was born up in inner city Nottingham, and I can remember as a young young boy being subjected to racist abuse, the P word being called. And you kind of don't understand at that age what is going on. Fast forward 30 years, and my daughter was experiencing the same thing. Very quick story. We were in a predominantly white area, very nice area, but she was one of the very few Asian people in the school. But she was subjected to being called the P word, and at one point being physically assaulted. And I kind of realized myself saying to my children, you've got to work twice as hard. And the first time I said that, I had to check myself and thought, what am I saying? But actually, I then realized that actually it's because of the years of kind of challenged discriminatory behavior I've faced, not just in my kind of working life, which is, there's always been barriers there. And one of the things I said, and I say this to Sally when I started working at Hallam, I said it felt different. And the fact that we're sitting here, you know, with over nearly 140 people having this very open, vulnerable debate is a choice that I made absolutely right. I think the challenge for me here, Cole, is, you know, 20 years ago, we were still talking about the same things. I just think this time it feels a little bit different. I'm seeing a slight more shift of the pendulum in terms of where we're going. And I think we can make a real difference. You know, I don't want to be in a position anymore where I have to say, my kids have to say to their kids, you're going to have to work twice as hard. So, you know, I've got to that point in my career where, would I have written that article 3 years ago even? No, I wouldn't have, because it would have seriously hindered my career progression in terms of where I needed to get to. I've been absolutely driven to get to senior level, and I've achieved that. But along the way, the amount of times I've had said to me, you're just not quite there yet. And I'm scratching my head thinking, what is it that you want me to do to get to that point? So I'm extremely passionate about this. I'm extremely passionate about all the EDI agenda. And I think that's why myself and Sally work extremely well together, because, you know, we are driven by passion. We're not driven by just achieving a strategic plan that sits on a shelf. Because the minute I felt that I'm not actually making a real difference, that's the minute I exit an organization. Because you get to an age where you think, you've got to have some purpose, and this is what I'm trying to do here. And it's fantastic to see so many people involved in this.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Umar. And I resonate and I connect with, probably because we're both from an Asian background and I've had that shared experience. Again, it comes down to that. I resonate so much with what you said. Guys, sorry, I was looking down a bit because there are so many questions coming in, and I'm just trying to pick the right questions for the panel that really challenges and tests the panels and tests our thinking. I just want to start off with one question here from Ruth. She says, when we talk about the attainments gap, is that in proportion to the number of students of colour against white students, so X% of each are gaining degrees, or does it reflect the fact that there are less students of colour at Hallam? So can I put that to Kevin to start off with, please?
Yeah, thanks, Cole. So that's the proportion of those groups of students that are getting 2-1s and first-class degrees. There was a related question, I think, which is what is the proportion? It's a 19% gap between BAME students graduating with 2-1 and first-class degrees and white students graduating with those degrees. There are different gaps, of course, if you then look at individual ethnicities within those groups, and it's the biggest in relation to black students versus white students, where it's over 30%.
Wow, and that is significant by any standards. Umar, can I just pose the same question to yourself, please, and what you think are the key causal factors behind that?
Okay, I have a theory on this. I don't know whether the theory is right or not. Having kind of come through the system myself, I was never really academically minded until later on in my kind of studying. And, you know, exams for me were really, really difficult, you know. So I chose the route of going through coursework, through, as there were GNVQs at that time, and then BTECs, and then going to university. And when you go then to university, you are then suddenly, you're suddenly kind of hit with a complete system that you are not used to. You've also got the challenge of being from the particular background, we weren't particularly well off. So I was also working, you know, so you have to maintain a part-time job. I didn't want to put the pressure on my parents. And I think a combination of all those factors, you know, made it very, very difficult. And you have to be really determined to succeed. I think we've become even more complex as a society. You have, you know, a lot of people from these communities who have come to the UK as refugees over 10 years ago who are now coming into the system. So they're already kind of struggling with the educational system because they're not from the UK, but they now they find themselves living here. I think that we have, as a sector, we have academics who sometimes get this, and sometimes we have academics who don't get this. And one of the things when I was working at University of Lincoln, a stark reminder to me was when we had a lot of Chinese students come, and they were struggling to engage with lecturers. And a comment a lecturer made said, well, you know, we can't understand them. You know, that's where the problem is. And I challenged back and I said, well, maybe you need to adjust your style. You know, oh, they don't come forward. They don't. I said, well, do you understand in South Asian culture, is that from the Far East, you know, they see teachers in a very high standing, so they won't come forward easily. So there's something around us getting more culturally competent. And I don't think we are culturally competent.
I think this whole aspect of being culturally competent is quite a moving feast, really, because as Sally sort of alluded to, we'll never get very good at this because it's a big world and it's a globalized community, and it's become a much more transient community around the world. People are moving around all the time. So I think the best that we can be when it comes to culturally competent is to make sure our radar is always switched on. To recognize the gaps that are being created and being formed, and to try and plug those gaps, or at least at the very least to understand those gaps. I've got a really good comment here from Shirley Masterson, who says that our BAME students do not see themselves represented by their lecturers, and that affects their engagement and sense of belonging. And perhaps that has a role to play when it comes to the attainment gap as well. And Sally, I want to just address this one to you because there's a direct correlation between students being made and the representations, I guess, within the BAME staff across the university. So what is the university doing around that?
Okay, thanks, Cole. Can I also just quickly, before I move into that question, just say that Academic Development and Diversity are running a summer school this summer where we are looking at cultural competency. So if people are interested in that, please could they get in touch with Academic Development and Diversity and hook in to that series. Again, we don't have all the answers, but it's just pushing all the time in terms of thinking about what we can do. So yeah, in terms of the pattern, the linkage, the corollary, if you like, between students and staff, it is something that we spend an awful lot of time on thinking about how we can manage to have greater diversity in our staff so that it does reflect better our student population. We have brought in positive action in recruitment so that we are looking to ensure that we've got as many people as we possibly can who are not only just interested in applying, we're actively going out to seek, looking to see where we can advertise in order to get people from a whole raft of varied and diverse backgrounds to be interested in applying in Hallam. When we get the applications, we have looked at blind recruiting. That's really difficult to do, particularly with the academic background, because of the intricacy, if you like, of their CVs. But we have tried unseen recruitment. We do positive action. We do always make sure that when we long list, we make sure that we've got a good diverse range of backgrounds, and we also check it really, really carefully for our shortlisting purposes. We also run unconscious bias training. We run that on an online, and we're also thinking about bringing that out into the classroom, because there is a challenge that unconscious bias, once you've gone through the training, all it becomes is it becomes conscious bias. And so, you know, all we're doing is just sort of move the deck chairs around a little bit. So we have to be constantly keeping ahead of the game and thinking, what else can we do to ensure that? And I've lost my train of thought, my apologies.
Sally,
Sorry, Kevin.
can I just chip in?
Yes, of course.
One thing that I've become aware of in terms of some work that HROD colleagues have been doing is developing the Equal Merit in Employment project, which essentially what it does is it enables and it's only being piloted at the moment, but it enables a BAME candidate to identify themselves as such, so that a panel chair can be told that that is the case. And then the Equality Act enables you, if all of the criteria are the same, to shortlist or to appoint a BAME candidate over a white candidate, if all other criteria are the same. So it's an exception to the standard direct discrimination rules. And I just think that's, for me, it's a good example of trying to think differently and to create opportunities that will slightly push the traditional ways of recruiting and selecting staff. So it may not end up being a huge project, but I think it's indicative perhaps of some creativity within HROD that I welcome.
Yeah.
Can I just?
Thanks, Kevin. I was desperately trying to remember what it was actually called, so thank you for jumping in and helping me. My brain went completely blank for a minute. We do also have targets as well. So when I joined the university, I think and I do appreciate, and I think it's a really good challenge that's coming in the chat room about, does BAME in some way actually reduce what we're trying to do? So I think that's another question that we've got to talk about. But when I joined the university, I think our population for Black, Asian, minority, ethnic staff was just under 5%. It's now just over 9%. That's not good enough. We've got to make it much better. But it is an indication of the fact that in just under 3 years, we have moved up by about 4%, which equates to something like 450 staff. So
I mean, it's always good to
step by step.
Yeah, it's always good to see forward movement in any organisation. But if I could just ask, what do you think the barriers are for the percentage to be moving forward just by 4% in so many years? What could we do to alleviate this and to increase that percentage growth?
I think we have to just, get the message out that Hallam is really open for people to come and join us. That we are really keen to bring people in. I am really struck by what Umar was saying, and I was watching. I put my screen on revolving view, and I was watching the nods of the heads around the audience, of thinking that sadly there are many people who think, I can't go and work at a university, and that is such a shame. And particularly universities such as ours, where we take our applied nature so very, very seriously.
Yeah, and that comes through in the interactions that I've had with the university in just 2 days. So credit to you. Umar, you just wanted to come in there.
Yeah, I just want to come in. I completely support what Sally's saying. Me and Sally have some wonderful debates and pushing the radical nature in me. I think that having experienced it myself, it's not a level playing field. Having worked in the NHS, where I looked at this really carefully, what you find is you find a lot of people from BAME backgrounds in the lower middle parts of the organization. And as it goes further up, it becomes very, very narrow, and there becomes a bottleneck. I think here at Hallam, what we are really open to is trying to change that dynamic. For me, we are hoping to start to look at exploring targets. This is not about quotas, this is about targets. And I know certain fractions will see that as a negative, as you've seen with the Black Lives Matter movement, and then suddenly you had the All Lives Matter movement. I always say, absolutely agree with you, all lives do matter, but how can all lives matter until black lives start to matter? We can't have one without the other. So from my perspective, we need to be more radical, and we are going to push those boundaries, and we need to be brave. You know, we may get a bit of flack. We may get a bit of flack, but actually change never came without some turbulence. And I think Hallam is definitely a leader in the sector. And I think me and Sally had this conversation on the very first day, sitting in the office when we were pre-COVID, and we both agreed we want to be leaders in the sector. It feels like a long time ago now, but it's not. It's only 7 months ago. But from where we've, you know, from where we're heading as an organization, I think we are definitely on the right track. But people can't get rid of the radical in me, not yet.
And I think, you know, we should all hold on to the radicals because in us, because it's those that cause us to step outside of our comfort zone and outside of the box to think in a very creative kind of way. I just love the way you talked about pre-COVID talks. You know, it's almost talking about the halcyon days when we used to get into an office and talk to each other, for goodness sakes, you know.
Yeah.
Guys, I just want to move you on. We've had a really good question here. And it's a shame that the person hasn't put their name to this, but hopefully you'll recognize yourself from this question. The question is, how do we shift the narrative, whether it's about recruitment or degree awards, onto recognizing BAME people for what they do bring to the table, rather than focusing on the privileged societal standards that they don't meet? This one sort of resonates with my heart because, you know, when it comes to diversity training, very often we find that mandatory diversity training is probably the least popular course that you have to go on, but that's because it's sort of rammed down your throat, I always find, and we forget to celebrate diversity. So I guess this question is all about celebrating diversity. How do we do that? How do we shift that narrative? So I just want to put this to Umar to start off with, please.
So the question is, how do we celebrate diversity then?
So the question is, well, that's my sort of paraphrasing of the question. The question actually is, how do we shift the narrative, whether it's about recruitment or degree awards, onto recognizing BAME people for what they do bring to the table, rather than focusing on the privileged societal standards that they don't meet?
I'm a bit torn on this question, because I think the first stage is that we need to acknowledge that there is white privilege. And I think white privilege doesn't mean that you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You know, absolutely not. What it means is that when you walk into a room for an interview, if you are white or if you are BAME, you have an element of privilege, which means that you're not having that unconscious or conscious bias being portrayed onto you, that halo horn effect. You know, when somebody sees you, you know, they will automatically want to recruit somebody that looks like you and behaves like you. I remember very, very early on in my career, one of my very first jobs, I went for, and I won't mention where, this was many years ago, and I got asked a question, what music do you like? And I gave some absolute nonsense around Oasis or whatever it was. I like Sinatra, I like Asian music, I like Bollywood music, you know, 60-year-old Bollywood music, that's me, you know, but I didn't give the answer of who I was, because I thought, wow, I got the job, I had no idea what music I was talking about. So for me, you know, to bring a bit of humor into it, you know, you look back and you do think that we can't change that narrative, Cole, unless we are able to feel who we are. Very similar to LGBTQ+, you know, our LGBTQ+ colleagues, they should be able to feel who they are and be able to express that. You know, I've sat in Zoom meetings while in COVID in my Asian salwar kameez. You know, I've sat in there. I've got no problems with that because I'm at a point that I can. But can other people who, you know, who are worried about what will happen to them?
Absolutely. So, Kevin, I just want to put this question to you. Do you think that this is about having to significantly reshape a culture within the organization? I always see the culture of an organization as its personality. So people have to see that personality in order to be attracted to the organization, as Sally's talking about in terms of recruitment. But do you think that there's a significant change of culture that needs to be brought about?
Thanks. So the short answer, yes, I think it does. But I want to address that specific question, if I can, about moving the narrative away from if you like, the inability of BAME students to achieve these social norms and onto what the things that they bring. I think that's, for me, that's a false question, because it's not about the inability of a BAME student to achieve those outcomes. It's the failure of the institution to set up itself in the right way to enable them to show that they can achieve that. We used to refer to this as the degree attainment gap, and you know, and many people still do. But it's come to be known in this institution as the degree awarding gap, to try to put the onus on the institution rather than on the individual. And it's an institutional failure rather than individual failure to achieve a 2-1 or a first class degree. So I just want to say that I think it's really important to keep the message on the institutional steps and the institutional obligation to set itself up in the right way that enables everybody to succeed who comes to university. But just to try to address briefly the idea of celebration of diversity and the success, there's loads of ways that happens, and that it should happen more. I went to a great session earlier this week where colleagues were explaining, and this was the Hallam Race Network group, were explaining leadership stories, how they had come to become leaders or had leadership journeys. They were inspirational stories, but you know, sadly, there weren't that many people in the virtual room to listen to those. So I think to try to give those types of stories a wider audience would be great. Last year, during the graduation week, there was a fantastic display about the contributions that Muslims bring to Britain. And it was organised, I think, through the Students' Union in collaboration with the university to have positive messages about diverse contributions that Muslim people had brought to the country. And I don't think we see enough of that across the university, in terms of the pictures that we see, the stories that we tell, the role models that we see in guest lectures, the case studies that we have. And so I think there's much more that we can and should do to improve the overall look and feel of the institution, and make it reflect an authentic, diverse voice.
Yeah, and Kevin, I think you've already answered some solutions to the whole cultural thing that we're talking about as well. Sometimes it's the look and feel of a place that actually then impacts at a very subtle level on your psyche as well. So thank you so much for that. I've got a really straightforward question here from Michelle Blackburn. How do we engage the Hallam staff who aren't choosing to be in the room today and engage in this learning? Sally.
Thank you, Cole. Yeah, I thought it was a wonderful question when I saw it come in on the chat room. It is so difficult, isn't it? Yeah, how do you get people who aren't interested, who are still sitting in their bubble thinking, well, it doesn't apply to me? And I think we're going to, and we have already had conversations about this. I think we take out, if you like, you know, this is probably clumsy wording, but we take out some form of roadshow, if you like. We put together a presentation, we pull together groups of people who are interested, and we get ourselves into team meetings, we get ourselves into departmental meetings, we get ourselves into directorate meetings. We run more events like this, we run more events like we did yesterday, and we just keep trying to push the boundaries. But I will, if you like, you know, we've got 134 people here now present. Can I ask every 134 of us to go back and to request that we have this conversation at the team meeting? You know, please come and speak to me, speak to Kevin, speak to Vicky, speak to Flora, speak to Umar, speak to your HR business partner, speak to your college faculty business partner. There are an awful lot of people here today who are very, very keen and who do have the power and do have the authority to turn that round. And that's what it takes. It just takes, you know, a couple of people to say, yeah, actually, I would like to take, you know, I would like to be empowered, and I would like to introduce, I would like to bring this in. And that would be wonderful. It would make the individual really feel as though they've done something great for the university. Put it on your PDR, talk to your manager about it. This event is being recorded. We're more than happy to just keep playing this on a constant loop. But I do think, and I think a couple of people have said in the chat room, you know, there is nothing to beat actually sitting down and talking face to face. And I'm more than happy to do that, whether it's to 6 people, whether it's to 60 people. And I know that, you know, so many of my colleagues share that viewpoint. Could I also possibly just also talk about a couple of things that you were talking about in the previous question, if I may, just because, and I know also things have come in on the chat room as well. So cultural competence, what does it mean? Cultural competence comprises, if you like, 4 specific areas. So one is awareness of one's own cultural worldview, which I think is always great to have a conversation about. The attitude towards cultural differences, which I think is so important, and perhaps starts tackling this notion of, do we really mean BAME? What do we want to say? Knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews, and I've got a wonderful example of that, which I can talk to you about. And then also cross-cultural skills. So that is what is meant by cultural competence. And as I say, Academic Development Diversity are running a series of programs on that across the summer. I'd also like to very quickly say that we have also run a pilot on reverse mentoring, which has been absolutely fascinating. It has only been a pilot. There have been about 15 of us taking part, where we as senior members in the university have worked with students. And we become the mentee and they become the mentor, and we meet on a regular basis and we ask questions. So how is your role here at the university? How is your experience? What are you benefiting from? What are the difficulties that you've come up against? The personal experience I've had with my young student has been absolutely fascinating. And you know, my eyes have never been opened more widely than some of the conversations we've had. It's been so rich. We've also got in Joanna Kemp, and I'm going to embarrass her, the most wonderful cultural calendar which she has designed, and that will be coming out to everybody over the next couple of weeks. We signed it off yesterday at the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So I just wanted to kind of raise those points as well, if I may. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. As you can see, a lot of work is being done at the university. A lot of resources are coming out to you to assist in the process. But I think I have to just, repeat what Sally has said, in the sense that if we want this to grow, then we have to take individual responsibility to get that word out and to touch our colleagues' lives wherever we go. And that is the only way that you're going to create this contagion, a positive contagion of awareness. I want to shift the focus slightly now. I want to ask some really hard questions. We've got a great one here from Laura Kilby. Do you have data on the number of complaints made by staff and students that include any racial component, and how these complaints were resolved? This kind of data should be open to scrutiny to help demonstrate our commitment to address racism and how and if we enact our stated zero tolerance policies. Umar.
Thanks for that, Cole.
You wanted a question time.
I did. That's a tough one. Okay, I'm going to be very honest here. We don't look at the data as much as we should. One of the things I have in my plan is to really interrogate data going forward. We do collect data, I think, with regards to people who are applying for roles in terms of shortlisting and so on. But when it comes to, I think, complaints, I think there's 2 things. The first thing is that you're right. If it's openly available, then it's open to scrutiny, which I think is absolutely the right thing to do. And I think a mature organization should be able to do that without fear of it being potentially used against the organization. Secondly, a real willingness to look at and tackle racial discrimination when it occurs. Zero tolerance is an interesting concept, because what does zero tolerance actually mean? You know, we hear that a lot everywhere in the NHS and the HE sector. For me, zero tolerance means, you know, if you're found to be discriminating on any ground, then actually that's it. From an employment perspective, you're done. But actually, it's not that easy. You know, if I'm being very honest, you know, our employment legislation doesn't completely allow you to do that, and rightly so, because you need to have a fair and transparent process. The other thing for me, Cole, on this is that I think we've got to be open to be able to look at exit interviews in a real, transparent way. I think when people are leaving, you know, that information is not valued as much as it should be. And that is something I'm asking my teams to start to look at once we get back in some kind of normality. Because exit interviews are so powerful. The intelligence you get in exit interviews will tell you exactly what you need to know. The problem is, organizations don't want to listen to that because they're going, these people are going. And there's some tough messages in there, but I know certainly I've given some clear messages in certain roles why I've left. And some of the organizations I have left because I had no sense of belonging. I felt I was not meant to be there. I was not welcome. But actually people chose to ignore that. So let's look at that data. Let's drill down deeper. And the answer to the question in a nutshell is we don't do enough.
Yeah, and I think...
Could I just add to that, please?
Yeah,
and just answer one of the other questions as well while I do so. There was a question early on about whether we're seeking to achieve race equality charter status from Advance HE. We are. So we're on a journey at the moment to submit in July 2021, and part of that process is gathering systematic data across both the student life cycle and the staff life cycle, from pre-enrollment of students through to graduation, and from pre-application of staff through to resignation. And so that data is being compiled as we speak, and clear patterns are coming out of that. We're feeding that into decision making rather than waiting until we make the submission.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kevin. I've just saw a question pop up there on the chat. Do we ask our, I forget what it was, Flora, you might be able to remind me because it was going rather fast. Let me just get it up myself, actually. Do we ask our BAME students? Yeah, do we ask our BAME graduates why they think there is an attainment gap? Kevin, can I just put that to you, please?
Yes. So, again, part of the preparation for the Race Equality Charter is a Race Equality Charter survey. So we surveyed staff and students about a whole host of race equality and inequality issues, and so there's a real rich data scene there. Obviously, not just BAME students. That would be all students that were asked those questions. And there are other avenues as well, but that survey is the main data source that we've got about student attitudes.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to move on to a few more questions here. We've got one from Dia Maria Babu. As the first full-time international students officer at Hallam Union, I'm happy to be part of this conversation representing BAME and other international students is my whole purpose. My question would be in line with Michelle's. How do we make students and staff at Hallam culturally intelligent, which sort of feeds into something that Sally was talking about around cultural competence? And how do we encourage them to talk about race? I think this is such a key issue. How do we get people talking about race, which is what today is all about, having a real conversation about race? Sally, can I just bring you in there, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Cool. I mean, to some degree, I will repeat what I've just said. I mean, I think we've got to get the conversations out, and I would challenge each one of the 135 or whatever it is we're here, that if each person goes out and speaks to 10 people or pulls together a community of 10 people, you know, we're starting to whip through the university. So I think that in terms of staffing, if we can then get the same sort of energy through the students as well, we'll be you know, rocketing through at great speed. And I'm really pleased to get that question from dear Maria Babu, who came and worked with us in HROD last summer. So it was fabulous, and I was really pleased to see her in the Students' Union. So I think it is really about just constantly driving it through. And as you said right at the beginning, Cole, no one of us has the monopoly on the great ideas. If you've got an idea and you want to share it and you think I could do that, please do email me, email Umar, email Kevin, email any one of us and say, actually, what about, how about, could you, can I, would you support? Yes, absolutely, we will. I also just wanted, if I may, to kind of quickly go back onto the point about complaints as well. Sadly, Umar, we don't always get to hear about the complaints, sadly. Things can get, squashed at quite a local level. People at a senior level don't necessarily get to hear them. And I think that this really is one of the biggest problems that we've got, one of the biggest issues we've got. And I think it does pick up with the question that Dia has put to us, is about really making the culture of making this open. And there needs to be, more peer support. There needs to be more open conversations. And we are in the process of creating the role of champions and ambassadors. And this isn't purely for race. This is right the way across any type of bullying or harassment. But sadly, it is going to be particularly pertinent, I feel, perhaps to race, where peer-to-peer, people can say to a colleague of theirs, can I just run this past you? I had this rather strange conversation. What do you think I ought to do with it? Because I think so often people get caught up. We like to think that we've got quite a flat hierarchy here in the university. Actually, anything, could be further from the truth. And we are the size of a small town. Let's not forget that. Hallam at full choke is nearly 40,000 people. That's huge. So it's very, very easy for people to get lost. It's very, very easy for people's concerns and troubles to get lost. And unfortunately, it's very easy for them to be buried as well. And I think, we have to try and engender that ability in people to say, no, that was wrong.
Yeah.
It's all the stuff that you experienced, Cole, in the police force, I think, Sad.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not sort of siloed to any one organization. This is a societal problem that we're all challenged with and we need to overcome. And you know what, we don't always get it right either. And I've got a comment here from Carolyn. She says, we live in Sheffield with a strong community of Jamaican and West Indian, and yet we didn't celebrate the National Windrush Day that I noticed. Celebrating landmarks like this creates inclusion and educates more of this, please. Absolutely, and this sort of feeds into the whole celebration of diversity as well that I was alluding to early on. Richard Calvert also makes a comment here. He says, we have some departments that are shifting cultures and outcomes already, both on addressing the attainment gap and on shifting recruitment practices. We have proved that we can change, but we're not doing it in enough places yet or consistently enough. So, Umar, I just want to ask you, is this something that organizational development can be picking up in terms of looking for good practice and trying to emulate that good practice elsewhere in the university, which, as Sally says, is a sign of a size of a small town? So sometimes it's about turning an old tank around, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've got a fantastic organizational development team who are really trying to drive this agenda through across all the strands of diversity. I think what we've got to start to do, if I'm being very honest, is make sure that we're not being superficial about our approach. And that's what's different here at Hallam. I don't think we are superficial. I think we are trying to go below that layer, which normally a lot of organizations tend to stay at the top and don't go to that next level down. And that's what we're trying to do. What we need to do is not paper over the cracks. If we've got an issue around race equality, let's talk about it. Let's try and find some positive solutions to do that. And we're doing that in OD. So one of the things that we are going to be launching is a targeted development program for Black ethnic minority staff. you know, which is almost middle management to the boardroom approach, and actually very similar type of thing that we've done with Aurora, you know, which has been a really great success. And we want to roll that out for other protected groups as well, not just race. So there is a genuine will to do it. I think we've got to be open enough, Cole, to talk about the race issue, and not be afraid that it's going to cause offence. You know, even I have sat in meetings and thought, oh, shall I bring this up or not? Because I'm thinking, oh, people are going to get offended. Well, no, I don't think that is. And I think this is where the Black Lives Matter movement has shifted the pendulum for people to be able to feel to do that. I'm a big cricket fan. But those of you who are cricket fans might have seen a recent interview by Michael Holding that was just come out. Those of you who've seen it, I have never seen that in my entire life, and I am a cricket geek. You know, somebody talking like that. So for me, we need to talk about those things. We're not talking about the ethnicity pay gap enough. We at Hallam are most probably one of the first that have started to try and bring that out. We feel comfortable talking about the gender pay gap to a certain point. We're still not there yet. But ethnicity pay gap, you know, if we look at that, that's huge. So from an OD perspective, we absolutely are going to be driving this agenda. And I think the important thing is, Richard's just asked that question, and Richard's, you know, one of our DVCs. And it's great that actually we've got leadership that understands there are still gaps to be addressed. And that's the important thing, because once we start to understand there's gaps, we can then start to move forward. You know, we, I think, need to understand and challenge our own privilege. You know, that's really important. You know, everybody has biases. It's okay to have biases, but we have to understand where we are as people, as staff, and how are we really trying to drive forward the race equality agenda. You know, I look around here, and, you know, majority of our colleagues are white, which is great, because actually, for me, we need ambassadors to drive this forward. And the OD agenda is going to feed into that, because what we want to do is harness the energy that we've got in the room today to help us deliver that change. I've got a small team of OD people who are very committed to this, but in a sea of 40,000 people, if I can put it, to use Sally's term, you know, it's a hard job to be able to do on our own as just the HR and OD directorate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
I understand.
can I just add two very quick points to that? I think it was yesterday or the day before, you facilitated a session with the senior leader group in the university, which is the sort of the heads of departments, of directorates, of areas, etc. And I think that's a really good way of being able to share practice across departments. So there were quite a lot of good examples of where colleagues in departments had been leading particular changes that can then be followed up afterwards. One other example is the recent creation of college race equality forums in each of the 3 colleges, and of course the creation of student union reps for each of the 3 colleges that will help get the student voice heard there. The colleges contain a number of different academic departments, and a college forum is a good way of sharing good practice, what works, what doesn't work across all the departments within the college.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think you're right. I think even that sharing of good practice at that head of department director level needs to be normalized. It needs to become everyday practice. It needs to be so comfortable. There's a great book that I read, and I've done an awful lot of work on it, and I've noticed that the police service has actually changed its complaints process as a result of this book, called Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed. And Matthew Syed talks about a growth mindset culture where we don't look to apportion blame, but we look to constantly learn. And I think a learning environment is an environment where, you know, just going back onto another book that I'm very passionate about, The 5 Dysfunction of the Team by Patrick Lencioni, where you embed a culture of trust within the organization, and as a result of that culture of trust, you actually have much more. Become more confident and comfortable with having difficult conversations, holding people to account, being single-minded around one goal, and actually sharing much more as well. So I think absolutely right, Kevin. There was lots of good practices coming from lots of different departments, but we sort of almost need to normalize that as if this is happening all the time. Because there's always a danger of creating a silo mentality where somebody's not focused on the organizational goal. They say, well, we'll just do what we can do and that's it. But it's a bit like trying to get each member of the organization being the person with a broom at NASA, helping to put the rocket, the rocket in on the moon. I think we've got time for one final question. And I just want to talk. Talk about a question that Barry McEwen has put out. Very simple. He's saying, "Is there something declaratory that staff can add to their emails? Like many of us have the LGBTQ plus allies banner to show a commitment to inclusion and openness to learning." It sort of feeds into what Sally was talking about. You know, we all have a responsibility to get this word out. Is this something simple that we could be doing? Sally.
It's a really, really good question. I think we'll be speaking to our comms and marketing colleagues tomorrow. Oh, no, not tomorrow, it's Saturday. On Monday. I might talk to them. No, I won't talk to them about tomorrow. Work-life balance is very important. Monday morning, we will talk to our marketing and comms colleagues about what we can do to put a banner on signatures. I think it's a great idea.
Brilliant, thank you. And one final question here. Sophie Warhorst has put something on about something that was in The Guardian. A lecturer at Hallam endured a mortifying experience finding the word nigger written on his whiteboard eraser. Do we know how the situation was dealt with? Should this situation have been publicised? I think the key question here is, should this situation have been publicised? Because it can go either way when you publicise something like this. Can I put that to Umar?
Yeah, I can answer that. So that was put to one of our lecturers, and as a result of that, I've actually been speaking to that lecturer on a regular basis, and actually I've struck up a bit of a friendship with him, which is great, because part of it was him feeling that the organisation was not taking action quick enough. I don't believe that's the case. I think genuinely that what we talked about right at the start is sometimes this can be a minefield for some people who think we're going to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, and then it becomes inaction. So for me, one of the things we discussed with him was actually coming on the journey with us and helping us change the process. And he has agreed. In fact, he was supposed to be on the panel today, but he couldn't for family reasons. But we're going to hopefully run a couple more of these, and we're hoping to get him on. So I think it's about changing it into a positive. Should it have been publicised? Well, it was in The Guardian. I think he put that out. He wrote the article, I think. Personally, I have no issue with that. I think what he did was actually trigger a change movement within the organisation. And sometimes we need, as organisations, especially large organisations, a bit of a kick up the backside. And that's okay, if it's done in the right way, because what's happened now is it's become a positive thing. It's about building trust and confidence with our Black ethnic minority staff. That was a huge thing in policing when I was in policing, and you'll know that. Trust and confidence can also be put in the staffing perspective and the student perspective. If they feel there is trust and confidence in the organisation, then actually what they'll do is they'll engage more, you'll have a more productive workforce, people will feel a sense of belonging. If you don't have a sense of belonging, it's like anything, you will not be able to thrive and be successful. So yes, we have done a lot of work with Peter, and he will be joining us hopefully at the next session.
Excellent, thank you so much. Kevin, would you like to make a comment on that at all?
Broadly about racist incidents on campus and that affect our students or staff body. I do actually think that first of all we have to take action, and we have to live by a zero tolerance approach towards it. Clearly, not on every occasion is it possible to immediately provide a public statement about the outcome of an incident, because there's a process that you have to go through, and you have to have natural justice to people, etc. I think that really underlines the need that when a matter is resolved, it's important that we do make statements about how we have dealt with racist incidents, and that we underline that we, as an institution, as a community, will not tolerate racist aggression, harassment, and bullying types of behaviour. And it may be that we need to find better ways of communicating to a wide audience the steps that the university does take. And I think we're learning all the time about that.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a constantly learning journey. Sally, any final words from you on this particular point?
No, I don't think so, Cole. Thank you. I think yeah, I think Umar and Kevin have expressed it clearly and cogently. Umar and I have had a number of conversations about this, and
might have done. I suspected it. Well, listen, guys, thank you so much to our three incredible people. I've been throwing all sorts of curveballs at them. I've wanted to test them, and I think they've risen to the challenge today. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody who's turned up today. You know, the fact that you're here, giving up your time on a Friday afternoon. Listen, you know, this is a time when we're trying to slow down, be with our families, but you've recognized the importance of this agenda to be here. I think I want to pick up on something that Sally had said earlier on in answer to one of the questions. We have an individual responsibility here to spread the word. One of the biggest reasons that we have any kind of ism out there in the world, in particular racism, is because of the silent majority. And if you look at any issue in the world, it's inevitably a minority that creates the issues, but it's because the silent majority don't get involved. So I think, you know, we can create a ripple effect here. Go back to your colleagues, encourage your colleagues to come on future seminars, ask the most difficult questions. You know, the panel said from the outset to me that they wanted to be tested today. They wanted absolute transparency today. And I hope that you've got some of the most challenging questions out there. I literally have not been able to keep up with the questions. I've been distracted with a chat box coming up. I've got it on WhatsApp. All the questions are coming to me on WhatsApp. So that's why I've had my head down most of the time looking for the nastiest questions I could find. But listen, we've had some great learning. Some key points that I want to just bring about from today. You know, Kevin talked about the degree awarding gap and recognizing that there's such a significant difference of 90% between BAME and white, and then 30% when it comes to black. And, you know, you could sense within his voice that there's an absolute desire to bridge that gap and slow that and reduce that gap. We talked about the demography of South Yorkshire. You know, Sally was talking about how the demography of South Yorkshire is so different to where she's from, and also the absolute need and the responsibility that Hallam has to be truly representative of its diverse communities. And she herself said she was surprised by the amount of diversity there is in Sheffield, and I love Sheffield for its diversity. Some great work being done in HR. You know, Sally told you about a whole host of things that HR are doing, but I think, you know, Umar would also talk about a lot of stuff that's been done strategically within organizational development. And of course, Kevin, with all the work that he's doing as the race champion. We talked about this issue around the celebration of diversity and how to be truly inclusive and truly representative. Then maybe what we need to do is shift the focus more on, so what is so good about being so diverse? What do all of these minority groups bring into the organization? And when we start focusing on that, then our focus also shifts to one of opportunity as opposed to one of scarcity. We talked about looking much deeper when it comes to complaints, looking at the data more, analyzing that data more to see what the gaps are that exist and how then we can resolve to bridging those gaps. And, you know, Sally said we all have a singular responsibility on this issue. No one person here owns this issue more than anybody else. please don't ever think that it's because you are non-white that you have more responsibility for driving that issue forward. I will say from personal experience that whenever I talked about race within the organization, within the police service, I actually felt that I was being perceived as somebody who'd got a chip on their shoulder, as opposed to when a white colleague talked about exactly the same issue. Sometimes the voice of power comes from another angle than from somebody who's perhaps been through those experiences themselves, because unfortunately we have those people within our organization who are going to be blind to the issue, and they will make all sorts of misconceptions, perceptions, and you know, not listen to certain groups of people but listen more to other groups of people. So let's all work towards this common goal. And finally, we can all do more to be on this journey together, and keep spreading that word, get more people onto the next seminar that we have. 170 is pretty impressive, given that, you know, we've only given you a few days notice. Imagine how many more people that we could have there hereafter. And hopefully those people who didn't make it today, hopefully we get, you know, 10 times this number second time around. I don't know if Zoom can even do that. I have no idea. But if it can't, we'll make it happen. I want to close now by thanking you all once again. I want to pass on to Kevin just to close today down. Kevin, it's all yours.
Somebody had to not unmute today. It was me. So I'll be very brief because I know people have got other places they need to go. I think we've talked quite a lot throughout the session about things that we're doing, progress that is being made, enthusiasm for making positive change, etc. I don't want anybody to leave this session thinking that there's complacency among the senior team. There absolutely isn't. And I think it's about trying to balance the idea of feeling angry, feeling bad about the inequality that we have in our society and reflected in our institution, and at the same time trying to find practical, tangible ways of making changes that will get us to a better position. If we only focus on feeling angry and feeling bad, then we don't get anywhere. If we only focus on doing things, then they're ill-informed. You've got to balance the two. And I think that's what I think conversations like this really help to reflect upon how you get that balance right. And I've been, again, trying to keep up with those questions and comments, and I'll go through them all again with colleagues. And I think we will as leaders have learned a lot from this session. So thank you very much for everybody for your participation. And I hope that we can run similar events in the future. I think, is that goodbye then, I think? Thank you, Cole. Oh, actually, let me just say a little bit more, emphasize. Cole, you've been an amazing facilitator for this session. The other one I was at the other day. You enable people to bring out really significant issues, but in a really ordered way. To manage 170 people in one room is fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Sally and Uman. Thank you everybody else for coming along. Have a great weekend. Cheerio.